So it's been a great couple of days, and I think it's going to be even more fantastic couple of years going forward. Because of all of you, because of the great panelists that we had. And I'm supposed to synthesize. I didn't do that. They always want to blame it on the black man. But anyway, I'm supposed to synthesize what happened in the last 2.5 days. Not possible. For me, at least, I know I'll have to sit with some of the brilliance, some of the heartfelt, some of the beauty, some of the connections that came out. So I just want to touch on a couple of big themes. So we are actually obviously talking about belonging without othering. And someone wrote a book with that very same title. And the ways to get there that we hinted at, because that's at a very potentially conceptual area level, is through bridging, through narratives, and through targeted universalism. And then we tried to have throughout the 2.5 days examples of that on the ground so you could see and you could share with each other what you're doing so you can continue to build. And we are aware that we're part of a much larger community, a community involving government, a community involving dancers, a community involving organizers, a community involving teachers, a community involving students. And there's a low bar to come to this community, sort of. We ask that you come and you at least begin to embrace the notion of othering, belonging without othering. What that exactly means, and if you listen carefully, and I know you did, to the themes throughout the conference, not all the speakers agree. There are little tensions here, and sometimes more than little tensions. That's okay. It's an evolving concept. It's a concept that has to be lived and co-created and redefined and lived again. And we're aware that even though there's this incredible group of people sitting on 3 levels, trying to avoid birds flying over you and pooping, there are thousands of people who are streaming online. Hello, folks online, representing dozens of countries and time zones. This truly is a global movement. And to be candid, I just had a conversation with Pastor Bob. I'm going to be going to some of his churches, meeting with folks who will wonder what I'm doing there, like some of you might be wondering what he's doing here. And hopefully we'll get to the point where we're not wondering why Pastor Bob is here, and they're not wondering why John is there. And in fact, just the opposite. Why isn't he here? Why aren't we there? And then another thing we're trying to do is bring together the peace-building world and the bridging world. And even though they're very close cousins, they lost each other's phone number. So what can we learn from each other? People have gone through this, not just conflict, but violent conflict. I want to just leave you with a few substantive things. There's the other. There are different kinds of others. We talk about this in the book. One kind of other is the explicit other. The people you think about when you think about the other, the people that you think about when you think about the devil, the people that you think about when you say, I could never be in a room with them. The people that in some way define who we are because we're in opposition to them. Those are the explicit others. We talk about them all the time. They take up way too much airspace. But then there's the implicit other, the other that we don't talk about, the other that's not even on our mind, the other that's invisible. And so when we tell our stories, we have to make sure we create bridges that engage the explicit other, but equally important, we have to engage stories that engage the implicit other. Who's not in the room? Who are we not talking about? Who did we miss? Many times when we talk about issues around belonging and social justice, we skip over indigenous populations. They're oftentimes an invisible other. We don't hate them, we just ignore them. My daughter went to Europe several years ago on a Fulbright to look at populations who are organized in such a way that they become likely the unhoused. And her theory was that it's not just unhoused in a general sense, but there are certain populations that are largely ignored and unhoused. We would say populations that are other, populations that don't belong. And she went to Spain, and she was asking, so who is that population? And people said, this is not the United States. We don't have such a population. You know, we know what you're thinking. You're thinking that we're racist here in Spain. We're not. We're Europeans. And my daughter said, well, I can believe you're Europeans, but you sure there's not anybody, no group? No, we don't do that here. And she was talking to liberals, progressives. And finally she said, what about the Romas? And they went, oh, yeah, forgot about them. So think about not just the explicit other, but the implicit other. Who is not in the room that needs to be in the room? Who's not part of the co-creation that needs to be part of the co-creation? Because that's one of the themes. And you looked at some of the practices that cities and counties are doing around target universalism, which is to have a universal goal and a targeted strategy based on how we're situated. And that'll be different in different communities. So, again, something very practical. And then bridging itself, long bridges, short bridges, bridging with the devil, not the devil, bridging with your sister or not. And what I want us to leave you with, two things, is if you don't want to bridge, and there's a lot of talk about what's the risk of bridging, and there are risks, but I would say there's a more profound risk of not bridging. But that's up for you to decide. But for those of you who are reluctant to bridge, I would say at least try to avoid breaking. So if you're not going to bridge, at least don't break. Maybe that's too much to ask. So I want to acknowledge that a lot of people helped make this conference possible. And so I want to acknowledge some of them were funders. Many of them were OBI staff. Many of them were volunteers. And again, I just want to acknowledge them. And there are too many to name. And as I was coming out, Rochelle, who was really the curator of this conference, said, don't mention anybody's name. But Rochelle has said many times, you know what, John is wonderful to work with, but he's not coachable. So I'm mentioning Rochelle's name. She did such a wonderful, wonderful job. And then, of course, there's the OBI staff, which I won't mention their names, but really great group of people, volunteers. People who cooked our meals, people who cleaned up. People who helped watch after our kids. And all of you taking care of each other and making a space where hopefully everyone felt like they belonged. So I'm going to close by saying, I know this is not the end, although I'm looking for a bed to sleep in tonight. I know this is not the end. And I know there's many things we touched on that we can go deeper in, and we need to go deeper in. So there are resources that we put together that you can download or call us up, and continue this work. And I want to say from the bottom of my heart, people ask me, what keeps you going? Why aren't you tired? I said, who told you I wasn't tired? I'm not stopping. What's my magic power? So my answer is this. I don't believe in magic power. But there are two parts to that question. Years ago, when I was working too hard, feeling frustrated, feeling like things were getting done, I was talking to my dad, and he said, John, what's wrong? You seem distressed. And I said, I'm really working hard, and I just can't seem to get this done by myself. I feel a little bit alone in this struggle. And my father's a Christian minister, and he said, you're never alone. God is with you. And I'm not a theist, so I don't believe or disbelieve. That's not the way I organize my life. But I realize, and I take that lesson from my dad with me, I'm not alone. I'm not a theist, so I don't organize around God. Who I organize around is you. That's the reason I'm not alone. You are my superpower. So thank you.